I need to get something here. This is my sacred cow. It stays on my desk. I keep it in a box. That's where I keep all important things, in boxes. My sacred cow. The second scripture reading for this morning continues with the story we started, but it is now in the 20th chapter of the book of Exodus, the first 17 verses. If you are inclined to read in the Pew Bible, again, it is a slightly different translation, but you can find it on page 64, or at least starting there. Then God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents to the third and the fourth generation of those who reject me, but showing steadfast love to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but rested the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. Honor your father and your mother, so that your days may be long in the land and that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or male or female slave, or ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. May God's blessings rest upon the experiences of Scripture on this day, upon the meditations of our hearts, and the words of my lips. So in preparing for the week, going through and spending time with the text and looking at the commentaries, there was one author who had in bold print in their commentary, "Dear pastor, please, whatever you do, do not preach on all the commandments in one sermon." And then they went on to suggest taking on the commandments that we most often ignore in our sermons. The one that in this pastor's case had never been preached in their hearing or by them in their 35 years of ministry. Interesting challenge they have laid before you. What we do with these 10 best teachings, and that's what they are, they're 10 best teachings. The word commandment or law isn't really ever used. It's best teachings or words. What we do with them is important for us because this is a moment in the life of the people Israel when community is being fashioned. We started last week with the Red Sea crossing. And now the people are being shaped into a people. And we know how hard it can be to be a community. There are things that we will argue over and argue about, and having some sense of guidance and guidelines is very helpful for us. It's a lifeline that gets thrown out. And so God brings Moses up on the mountain, and we have this extended period of the people at the foot of Sinai. And God gives these teachings. Now, initially, it was understood that these were actually an oral tradition. And then later on in the life of Scripture, as the stories are brought together and a Bible is formed, the idea of written commandments that Moses carries down. And I still have that image from the Mel Brooks movie. These are the 10 commandments. But what they're given for, either in an oral tradition or in a written down form, is a way of shaping. They're given to help us form communities. It teaches us how we can interact with God in a vertical relationship. There's certain things we do and don't do. And it teaches us how to act with each other in horizontal relationships. Again, there's certain things that we do and don't do in this community. It's almost like a do this in remembrance of me moment here in Exodus. All of these commandments are tied together. And what we understand with these best teachings is that they're actually not fixed. They occur several times in Hebrew Scripture, and sometimes in the retelling, things change in the earlier versus the later ones. And it reveals to us an understanding that as the context of the community changes, our experience of these 10 best teachings will change. But there's certain things that run all through Scripture that are touched on in this text. And one of those is the idea of fidelity. The Hebrew word is a hesed, a loyalty. Loyalty to God and loyalty to each other. It's one of those places where the vertical and the horizontal directly mirror each other. And so as Moses brings these teachings to the people, again, either in an oral way or in stone, after each command or teaching is given, it is envisioned that the people would respond. And so you wouldn't have one long reading like I just gave to us. It would be, then God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. And the people would respond, no God but God, or something along those lines. And then the next teaching would come and the people would respond. But that no God but God, that loyalty, that fidelity commandment, that's the one where we're going to live. Because God goes through this long list, no sacred cows, even if they're cute and have bobbly heads. Don't go making images and worshiping them. Don't go creating things that you can make with your own hands and saying, this is God. Our ultimate fidelity is only to God. And that comes out over and over and over again throughout Scripture. We have stories of the people that are being stitched together and forming a community, and they get distracted because we're human. We get distracted. There are other things that seem to become more important. Things that become like gods to us in the amount of time that we spend with them, the amount of resources we're willing to invest in them, the way that we are willing to defend these things, be they ideals or symbols or whatever. And we create little sacred cows. Little sacred cows that break that fidelity commandment that separate us from the one who said, I am the Lord your God. And these other gods, these small g deities that we create, that the people in Scripture constantly seem to fall into, well, they're all over the place. The people in Hebrew Scripture were surrounded by other peoples that worshipped other gods. And it's hard to rub elbows with people and not pick up something of it. And that's actually one of the glories of creation. When we mix and mingle, when we rub elbows, when we dare to have our community be open and embracing of other communities. But it's also one of the challenges, because we might be tempted. We might say that this thing that is not God is in some way like God. It does the things of God for us. This cow in a box will protect me, will provide for me, will grant me safety and security, and therefore I elevate the cow in a box. But it's not just the thing. It's not just the thing. I mentioned ideas because fidelity, infidelity in the religious context also involves language. It involves the words that we choose to use, the images we create. Our ideas, in the ways that we express them, can be just as idolatrous as if I were to take my cow in a box and actually offer sacrifice to it. We can reduce God in this way. Our religious infidelity can try to put God in a box. God, you're only good for these particular things, and if I need something else, well, I will rely on this, or this over here, or this over here. And that will lead me to an infidelity, a breaking of covenant, commitment, a wandering away from relationship. And like I said, that vertical is connected to the horizontal, because when we break our relationships across the horizontal plane, these things that we say need to be reconciled, that infidelity has the same kind of damage, the same kind of trauma connected to it. It's one of the places where we might even come to understand the way that God can feel when we are unfaithful to God. And so Moses goes up the mountain and receives these best teachings, this collection. They're not new in many ways. The people of Israel have been fashioned over this whole Exodus journey. But these 10 best are convenient for us. Not to say that they are fixed and forever unchanging in the specific wording, but to understand that that thing that exists within them, that core, that call to be a people in relationship with God, is probably the most important thing in our lives. And that perhaps one of the more important commandments on this day is the commandment to be faithful, to have some sense of fidelity to God, and not just to God, but to each other. As a people of God in a community of faith, because it is in that faithfulness to each other and to God that we express what we believe. And we believe in a God that is faithful, a God that has given us best teachings, a lifeline, a commandment, and a commitment. Thanks be to God, and amen.